Welcome to the Infuse Compassion podcast, hosted by me, Amy Quisenberry.
And me, Mark Carpenter.
We are on a mission to make this world a kinder place for us all by bringing healthier human connection to communities, families, and organizations of all types and sizes.
Our goal is to create stronger relationships, more inspired teams, increased trust, and improved results.
So let's get started with more ways to infuse compassion into our world.
Welcome, Compassionators, to our next edition of the Infuse Compassion podcast. We're so glad that you're with us. We just had a great conversation with Rebecca Ali about the topic of burnout. And if you haven't listened to the previous episode about burnout, you need to go back and listen to it. There is so much richness in there. We talked not only about what burnout is, but why it happens and what we can do about it for us and for other people that might be experiencing burnout. So to get our conversation started today, Amy, I want to bring you into this and just ask what stood out to you. What in that conversation with Rebecca, what are some of the key points that jumped out to you about burnout?
Yeah, so there's so many different areas, but there's some key things that I want to spotlight. One is that everybody's burnout looks different. Your burnout looks different than my burnout. And that could be from the perspective of long-term. You know, they say long-term, your long-term may be different than my long-term, right? And then also what impacts you, how it impacts you could be different because there may be things that you're doing to minimize burnout, one of us more than the other, right?
Yeah.
So she talked about, are you meditating? Are you doing yoga? Do you have a connection, a group, a community that you can go to, somebody that you can talk to? These things are things that can minimize the impact of burnout on you, not prevent, but minimize, right? And then the systems. She talked about the systems of it's not about us. Let's not blame ourselves, right? And I'm sorry, I should probably pause and give you an opportunity to come in here, but yeah.
You're doing great.
Yeah. Okay. So systems, really looking at, and you know, I want to articulate. I'm getting really excited, so I want to slow myself down a minute because I was just so taken in by the conversation with her when she talked about the fact that sometimes we can be blaming ourselves for not feeling like we're tough enough. Maybe it's a perspective that we have, the way we were taught, the way we were raised, that there's this expectation that I should be tough enough to push through and to handle this and to not let this affect me. And the reality is it's about your brain. It's about the amygdala in your brain is an overdrive. And I actually put together an analogy where when I was going over my notes, I pictured, imagine being in a vehicle. You've got the pedal to the metal, as they say, the gas all the way down. You're going 150 miles per hour for who knows how long. What's going to happen to the engine? What's going to happen to the tires? What's going to happen to the carburetor, the water, the gas, all of this? Guess what, folks? It's going to break down. It's not the car's fault.
Yeah. And it's funny because you're talking about that. What's going to happen to the tires? The first word that came to my mind was blowout. Think about how that connects to burnout, or you're going to burn out your engine. And I loved what she said. I'm glad you brought up the brain science, because when she was talking about that amygdala on overdrive, she said, because that's on overdrive, you can't feel safe. You don't have safety regulation during burnout. And it just triggered in me times where I've been in that burnout moment. And yeah, I didn't feel safe in the environment that I was in, which I think is something really key for us to think about with our families and our community members and the people who work with us, and particularly if you're a leader, people who work on your team. if you're in a situation where everybody's just working full out, pedal to the metal, as Amy was saying,
Mhm.
start looking for these signs of burnout and recognizing that they probably don't feel safe and they may not even feel safe to talk about it. And so it's
Mhm.
incumbent upon us, if we're really being compassionate, to help people to talk about that. How are you really doing right now? Are you experiencing any of these symptoms of burnout where you're
Mhm.
feeling exhaustion, or you're overeating or undereating, or just you can't concentrate? Any of these numbers of things, and we'll let you go back and listen to Rebecca talk about those in the previous episode. But are you experiencing some of those problems? And you may be going through burnout right now. Let's talk about how we can fix that.
That's right. That's right. And I think that, having that awareness key. And so again, one of the things that you and I talk about a lot, Mark, is our areas of expertise. Lead like a person for you, start with compassion for me, right? And in my start with compassion framework, the C is the connected piece. Are you connected to yourself? The A is awareness. Are you aware of what's going on? You can flip that from a leadership perspective to what you were just talking about. Are you connected to your teams? Are you sitting with them? Are you observing? Are you listening? She mentioned this. Are you listening? Are you listening to yourself? When you talk about safety, I thought about this too. Okay. These spidey senses that we joke about, these are real. Anybody that's ever walked down maybe an alley that feels unsafe, walked into a room, a house, an environment, and they've instantly felt unsafe. Well, hopefully you don't stay there. Hopefully you excuse yourself and you get yourself to a safe place. It's trusting that. These instincts that we have with burnout, don't dismiss them. This is where self advocacy comes in. This is what I heard in her message.
Well, and that goes back to the physiology.
Mm.
That spidey sense that you were talking about is really our physiology telling us something is off. We're out of alignment here somehow and in some way. And yeah,
Mhm.
it's important to listen to those. It's interesting, those main causes of burnout that she talked about, which were workload, lack of control, insufficient rewards. And I look at that as not just physical rewards, but intrinsic rewards, poor
Mhm.
relationships,
That's
lack of
right.
fairness, values misalignment. And from a leadership perspective, I look at all of those as being able to be addressed by the first line leader. If your team is experiencing burnout, look at some of those causes and start looking about how can we shift workload? How can we give you a little bit more control over your environment? Well,
Mhm.
if we can't increase your pay, are there other ways that we can give you some intrinsic rewards and recognize the work that you're doing? Are there ways that we can strengthen our relationships and help it feel more fair and balanced here? As a leader, you have some control over those, but you have to be focused not just on process, but on people.
That's
And
right.
again, that's what I refer to as leading like a person, where you're really seeing people and seeing what's going on with them. And if you're listening intently, that's the first step in helping you see what some of those problems are so that you can address them. And again, I want to emphasize something that Rebecca said, that this isn't just about, oh, let's all just be happy at work and,
Mm.
have rah-rah environment at work. This is about the results that we're experiencing.
Mhm.
Because if you have high burnout over a sustained period of time, you're going to get high turnover and the huge costs that go along with that. Productivity is going to suffer. Even though people are working super hard, productivity is going to suffer because they're not giving their best work, because they're not able to give their best work. You're going to get
Mhm.
lack of engagement. So there's all sorts of problems that'll come if you as a leader aren't aware of the burnout that your team's experiencing. One other quick point that I want to throw it back to you, Amy, is that the point that she made, that if you're experiencing burnout, it's very likely the people on your team are too.
Mhm.
Sometimes we think this is just a me thing. I'm the only one in isolation. If you start feeling burnout, start talking to other people. How are you doing? Are you experiencing burnout right now? Now, maybe they'll come back and say, no, actually, I'm okay. Well, then you start looking at yourself and saying, what do I need to adjust in my life? But the more
Mhm.
you can socialize it, the more you can talk about it, the easier it is to actually find some solutions.
That's right. That's right. I want to go back to this place of being, you find yourself in burnout, because when you were talking, one of the things that came to my mind was when she spoke about you're actually stuck in fight or flight.
Yeah.
So when you think about a team's effectiveness, when you think about a person's ability to show up and do their best work, do you think they do that when they're in fight or flight?
There's no way. And again, it goes back to that feeling of not feeling safe.
That's right. That's right. And so when we go, and this is core to when people say, "Oh, compassion is soft. Oh, compassion is all it's kind of wishy." No, it's not. It's actually a really great business philosophy and practice to bring into work, because it helps you get the best out of your people by connecting and understanding and being present. And one of the things that I loved, so in addition to this, I'm going to stop myself because I loved that Rebecca called out, don't do another survey. Don't do another survey. And especially don't do a survey if you're not prepared to do anything about it. Because yes, we want to listen. Yes, we want to ask questions. Yes, we want to be informed, but we also want to be prepared. Don't ask a question that you're not prepared to do something about, especially on a survey, And I want to make
Or
one more
that you're
point.
not able to do anything about. That was another point that Rebecca made.
Right,
That
right.
if,
That you're
if
not able to.
you don't have the capacity to do anything about the survey responses, you better not do the survey, because people are going to expect you to do something with it.
Yeah. And with this, I want to go back to the mid-level manager that you spoke about, right? That is closest to the team. I've been in many scenarios as an HR leader where I've watched operations mid-level leaders feel powerless,
Yeah.
feel absolutely powerless. And they have been, I believe, in retrospect, a state of burnout, a state of exhaustion where they couldn't think and they couldn't function effectively. And I stopped and I'm thinking, okay, you can't do everything, but what can you do? Because when we just throw our arms up and say we can't do anything, let's it I get it. It's a lot. It's a lot. But when we're thinking about our teams, what can we do? What can? And I loved the example you shared and Rebecca shared it as well. Can we change somebody's shift? Can we give them, they've got this appointment, it's in the middle of the day. Can we take that extra 30 minutes, that give it to their lunch, take it out of their lunch and move it to the end of the day, move it earlier in their day? Are there adjustments that we can do, little modifications that have a big impact? And guess what? No cost impact to leadership.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And that point about the sense of feeling like you can't do anything. I'm sitting here listening to you, and I know that you were not the HR leader at my company when I was experienced the burnout as that middle manager, but I did have that feeling. And not only that, when I went to my senior leader and said, hey, I'm trying to deal with these kind of problems, they said to me, oh, there's nothing we can do about that.
mm-hmm.
That doesn't help. That's not helpful.
Yeah.
Let's be creative. Let's look at ways. And again, it falls back into leading like a position when you say, well, our policies don't allow for that, or the process is this. Well, what about the people? Let's look at what we can do for the people. And I'm not saying that we violate a bunch of policies, and I'm not saying that we don't work hard, but how can we make the work better so that we get better results by focusing on what people need?
That's right. And there's actually a diagram that I did a couple years ago. It's somewhere on social media, and I call it the compassion triangle, right? From a business perspective, where you've got to be looking at the people, right? The processes and the systems, right? And then leadership is in the center. Leadership is smack dab in the middle of that. And they have the most ability to influence the people, the processes, and the systems. And if all three are not in alignment, if they're not congruent with each other, this is when you go into your productivity starts to struggle. Your engagement begins to struggle. Maybe it's client satisfaction. I guarantee your ROI is struggling, right? So I definitely, if anybody is listening to us is saying, this sounds like my company, look at your people, look at your processes, and look at your systems and see how in alignment they are with each other.
Yeah. And another point that Rebecca made, that's one of the platforms I stand on all the time, which is just listen to your people. Create a safe space for them to share what's really going on with them and get their perspectives. I know sometimes as leaders, especially those frontline leaders, it feels like, well, I'm the leader. I need to make all the decisions. I need to know everything. And if I don't know everything, then maybe I'm not a good leader. And we get worried about that. Well, the best way to know what to do is to listen. Is to listen to what's really going on with your people. And like you said, Amy, you can't do everything, but you can always do something. And so it's identifying what's one action that I can take, what's one change that I can make here to help reduce the burnout or possibly even prevent burnout from happening down the road. You may be in a situation where your team's building up to burnout. They're not quite there yet, but you can see it coming. Well, what can you do? What's a step you can take to prevent getting into that full burnout mode and experiencing the costs that you were just talking about, Amy?
That's right. That's right. I wanna go back to that piece. Because what Rebecca called out on that, what's one thing you can do, is self-assess. And I think that, I think it's really important for us. There's like, my mind is going a couple different places, but one place is when we wake up in the morning, we're responsible for what we do, how we do it. We're accountable for those things, right? And I think it's really important for us to be able to stop and really self-assess and say, am I satisfied with my quality of life right now? And if I'm not, what isn't working? Now, Rebecca called out specifically, we don't all have the luxury to change a situation that may be affecting our burnout. And I really want to, I get it. I've been there where I've felt like I'm at the end of my rope and feeling powerless. But for those that can make a change, right? Or what can you do? Maybe you can't overhaul everything, but is there one thing that you can change? What's that one thing? But here's what I'm saying. To try to not self-medicate, to try to not go, I call it going underground, where we disappear, we disconnect, we hide in shame. I've done this. I've done all of that. I've self-sabotaged. And guess what? All I do is dig myself deeper, And so reach out, connect. I need help. Can I tell a quick story?
Please do.
So I actually was it last week? Last week or the week before, there was some stuff going on in my personal life. Boy, was I struggling. I was really, really struggling. And I felt myself I call it going underground, where I'll literally disappear. I don't want to talk to anybody. And I just get in this real dark place. And I hadn't been there in so long. And I was on my way into the office and I was crying, mascara all over my face, crying. And I stopped. I pulled the car over and I texted a friend of mine. I've never done this before in my life. And I said, I need help. I need help right now. Like, I'm okay. I'm not going to do anything drastic, but I'm struggling. Can we talk later today? And she said, yes. But it started with me. And I was, we were done. A few hours later, we had a 20-minute conversation. I was back on track.
Yeah.
But if I wouldn't have reached out, Mark, I don't even know if we'd be doing this podcast today. I may have gotten really dark. I don't mean like disastrous dark, but like, Mark, I'm kind of in a dark place. I don't know if I could be upbeat,
Yeah.
I mean, really. So thanks for letting
And-
me,
well,
we promised vulnerability. I just went there.
and this is what Rebecca was talking about with self-advocacy.
That's it.
Their self-advocacy of just looking at yourself first and saying, okay, what can I do for myself? And I'm going to take some of these steps. But it's also self-advocacy of reaching out and saying, hey, I need some help here.
Mm-hmm.
And knowing that you're doing it not for a selfish purpose. I think sometimes when I've been in those situations, it's like, well, I don't want to seem like the weak member of the team, or like I'm being a whiner or a complainer or something. But that's not advocating for myself. And if I advocate for myself for the purpose of I want to perform better, and I want to help my team perform better, and I want to show up in my personal life as a better version of myself, self-advocacy helps everybody. It doesn't just help you. By getting you out of that burnout stage, it puts you in a position where you can be more helpful for other people.
That's right. That's right. And that is such a key piece, because just connecting with my friend, we hadn't spoken yet, but just knowing that I was going to talk to somebody in a few hours, I was able to focus on work. I was able to get back to some normalcy. But as long as we self-isolate, as long as we go, this is it, right? It's a lot easier to get caught up in the tornado of our emotions if we stay like this, instead of reaching out and saying, I need some help.
And I want to be real about this too. It's hard. And it's particularly hard to do that when you're in that inflamed amygdala state, where you're in that fear that's created by that fight or flight response. It's hard to reach out and say, help me. We tend to isolate, to run away. And so we need to fight that physiological challenge that we have in that moment so that we can take the steps that'll actually move us out of it.
And Mark, I'm so glad you said that, because like I said, I'd never done it before. I'd never reached out and said, I need help. I'm telling you, it's 3 years of working my Start with Compassion framework that got me to a place where I could say, Amy, you're not alone. You have resources. You have friends. One person, all you need is one person. That's it. You just need one. And then to just be brave enough to pick up the phone, to walk across the street, whatever it is. Yeah.
So Amy, I'm going to suggest we wrap up with this.
Yeah.
Give me just one key takeaway that you want people to remember from that conversation with Rebecca about burnout. And then I'm going to give my key takeaway, and then we'll wrap from there.
Yeah.
All right. Maybe not fair, because I asked you the question. Maybe I'll give my key takeaway first.
Because I've got 3. So you go, and then I'll go. Thank you.
I'm forcing you down to 1. All right. Let's turn this around. I'll give my key takeaway. My key takeaway was burnout is not weakness. Oh. Burnout is something that we experience because of what's going on around us, and it's real, and there are reasons. So you don't have to feel like, oh, I'm admitting there's something wrong with me if I tell people that I'm experiencing burnout. Burnout is a natural function of a lot of the environmental factors that we have to deal with, particularly in the workforce. And so we shouldn't feel bad about experiencing burnout. We should acknowledge that it's there and do something about it.
That's right. And that's a perfect segue to mine. Do something about it begins with self-advocating. we have got to advocate for ourselves. We can't be waiting for somebody to come knock on our door. Ideally, we have people in our lives that see us, that notice us, but there isn't a guarantee, because you know what? They, like you already said, and like Rebecca said, they may be going through it as well. And so they may not, we've all got our own stuff, right? And so it's important for us to advocate for ourselves. That was one of my biggest takeaways. So
fabulous. Well, let's wrap it up from there. Thank you, Compassionators, for listening in. Join us next time for another episode of the Infused Compassion Podcast.
see you soon.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Infused Compassion Podcast. If you enjoyed the conversation, please share a review and like the podcast so other Compassionators can join us. Until next time, let's all do something each day to infuse compassion into the world. For more information on our guests, see the show notes. For more information on Mark and Amy, go to infusecompassion.com.